So here we have Peter and a relationship with Jesus. Peter the apostle, originally called Simon, was one of Jesus' most prominent disciples. He was part of Jesus' inner circle with John and James. He was a fisherman before Jesus called to follow him. Peter's personality was impulsive and outspoken. His personality might have gotten him into trouble. He just kind of jumped right into things. And he was so passionate with his relationship with Jesus. Peter, just like us, did fall short and will make mistakes just being a follower of Christ. Well, the start of the relationship began when Peter and Jesus in Matthew 4, 18 to 20. One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore at Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who will also be known as Peter, and Andrew. They threw their net in the water, and they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Follow me, and you can fish for people." They left their nets and followed him. I believe Jesus knew what he was doing when he asked the fishermen to follow him. To be a fisherman and to be a preacher or a leader in the church, it requires certain skills. And the skills are similar. Patience, you have to learn to wait to fish. You have to wait for the bait, and you can't be restless or the fish will just run away. In preaching and bringing people to Christ, you must be patient, and you also have to wait. You can't expect quick results when you're showing somebody, trying to get somebody to come to the Lord. You need perseverance and to be a fisherman, and you need perseverance for a leader. And you must have courage to be a fisherman, because the sea can be dangerous. You need to have courage to be a Christ follower. Can you see the similar attributes? So here God's doing great things for Peter. The Bible shows us various places where Peter has encounters and situations where he goes through with Jesus. Matthew 14, 22-33 is the story of a great storm. While the disciples were fishing at night, they see what they believed is a ghost walking on water, and they were frightened. Jesus tells them, "Do not be afraid. Take courage. I am here." Peter recognizes Jesus and says, "Lord, if that is you, order me to come to you walking on the water." And Jesus says, "Yes, come." Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. Peter lost his focus because of a big wind, and he got scared and began to sink. He took his eyes off of Jesus, and he started to worry. Peter said, "Lord, rescue me." And Jesus pulled Peter up and said, "You of little faith, why do you doubt me?" And now we have another scene with Peter and Jesus. It's Matthew 16, 13, 19. And Jesus and the disciples were in Philippi. Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they say, "Well, some people say John the Baptist, some people say Elijah, some others say Jeremiah or other prophets." Then Jesus asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Instantly, Simon Peter says, "You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God." Jesus says to Simon Peter, "My Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You do not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter," which means rock, "and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." This was Peter's declaration, the great discovery and confession that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God. And that's how the Christian church began. Jesus gave Peter the keys to the kingdom, and he trusted Peter, even though he knew Peter was going to betray him later. It's mind-blowing. So we have Matthew 18, 21, 35. Jesus is talking to the disciples about what it means as a believer to forgive sins and how to forgive your debts. And Peter had a question on how forgiveness works. Peter asked Jesus, "Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and forgive me? Up to 7 times?" And of course, Jesus answered Peter with, "No, not 7, but 70 times 7. What Jesus was saying to Peter is that there is no number you can put on to limit forgiveness. The lesson here that we should take is we must forgive in order to be forgiven. Those who do not forgive cannot hope that Jesus would forgive them. And an interesting thing is, in the book of Amos, a prophet, they were talking about the Jewish custom is that you can forgive somebody, forgive their transgressions only 3 times in the Jewish custom back then. And on the 4th, they would get punished. If it was a 4th offense, they would get punished. So Peter kind of thought he was being generous by saying 7 times, but no. So that's another thing. Peter's like, oh, okay. So we move ahead into John 18 at the Garden of the Gethsemane when Jesus is later to be arrested. He went to a private spot to pray, and he took Peter, John, and James with them and asked them to stay awake and watch. These disciples were totally distraught and had trouble staying awake. Later in the night, Judas arrived with a crowd of people, of full-blown soldiers and army and whatever, with swords. That stirred up Peter. And without thinking that this could potentially cause a full-out battle, he draws his sword and strikes a man on the right ear, cutting off the right ear. Jesus firmly corrects Peter, and by telling him, put that sword back in its place. Jesus also healed the guy's ear. So the arrest happened, and I do believe that a lot of the disciples fled at that point because they had no idea what was going on, and I think they had fear. But John and Peter stayed. Peter followed Jesus to the courtyard, and Jesus was in the high courts, or when Jesus went into the high priest's house, and Peter stayed out in the courtyard around the fire. So this is when Jesus' prediction comes about Peter denying Jesus 3 times. And it so happened, Peter did deny him 3 times. He told 3 different people that he didn't know Jesus. And immediately Peter repented. Can you just imagine how he must have felt? He wept bitterly and his heart was broken. And this was a burden that Peter carried with him. But remember, just before that, he was willing I do believe he was willing to die just to protect Jesus from from the soldiers. So after, now we're going to skip ahead to John 20, 1 through 10, and this is Jesus' burial. And this is the point where they're assuming, they're just going to check on Jesus. They're assuming that the tomb is closed. Very early in the morning, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone was taken away. And this was on the 3rd day. She ran to tell Peter and John. Peter and John ran to the tomb. John did get there first because he outran Peter. But John looked into the tomb, Peter was the first to enter. He didn't hesitate. He wanted to see what was going on. He had all kinds of feelings. He had grief. He had hope. He had strong desire to see for himself. His running was an eagerness to understand what happened and to how to process the empty tomb. So he ran to see Jesus. In John 21, 1 through 14, Jesus showed himself to the disciples at the shoreline. The disciples were fishing and they weren't catching anything. Jesus says, "Lad, have you caught any fish?" And they replied, "No." "Cast your nets to the right side." So they've been fishing all day. And like, really? All we got to do is like cast our nets to the right side and we're going to get fish? So they did it. And then John recognized the Lord, and John said to Peter, "Is that the Lord?" When Peter heard that, instantly Peter got out. He didn't hesitate. He jumped into the sea and swam to shore, for he knew it was the Lord. Even though he was swimming, I think he was running to Jesus. There was a charcoal fire waiting for them that Jesus had made, and he had breakfast prepared. And Peter took some fish and he added it to the breakfast. So how cool must that have been that the resurrected Jesus in the flesh, he wasn't a ghost, he was in the flesh having breakfast with his disciples. After breakfast, Peter had a conversation with Jesus. He specifically asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" I think Peter was confused, like, where is this going? And Peter said to Jesus, "You know I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." And he said that 3 times. Jesus, in his gracious forgiveness, gave Peter the chance to wipe away the memory of denying Jesus 3 times and allowing Jesus 3 times to declare his love for Jesus. And Peter did great things for the Lord, to the point where he was nailed to the cross. He felt unworthy of dying in the same way of Jesus, so he asked to be crucified upside down. So do we love Christ enough to go to that kind of cross? If you look back at Peter's life with Jesus, you can really tell that God had a handle on him and God was doing great things. God was preparing Peter to be the rock of the church because of Peter's declaration that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus had a special relationship with Peter. Jesus knew Peter was going to be the disciples' leader, so he put certain expectations on Peter. God used Peter's shortcomings, confusion, betrayal, anger, and best of all, passion to allow Peter to grow and understand what it means to be a follower of Christ. And you can run to him. Everybody run to him. You can run to him.